Greetings all, Dr. X here, good to see ya. All right, in today's video, I'm going to talk about the African American community and two sociological institutions that are significant for the community. The first is the institution of family, and the second is the institution of religion. Stay tuned. Okay, let's begin with a common definition of social institution. And this definition I'm taking from Ballantyne's Our Social World, the 2022 edition. So here's how it's defined. A social institution or institutions are organized, patterned, and enduring sets of social structures that provide three things. First, they provide guidance for behavior. Secondly, they meet basic survival needs. And finally, they are integrated both at the micro and the macro level. So that's what I mean by institution. So what are some of the examples? Well, I have a couple listed here. There's economics, education, family, government, and religion are all sociological or social institutions. So for this video today, I'm going to talk specifically about the institutions of family and the institution of religion. So what is a family? Well, there are different definitions for family. Different cultures have different definitions. We'll focus specifically on African Americans here in the US, and we'll start with the government's definition of family. I'll look specifically from the US Census Department on how they define family, and here's what they say. The US Census Bureau defines family as a group of two people or more, one of whom is a householder, in other words, the head of house, related by birth, marriage, or adoption. All right. And then when the census comes through, they want to know who's residing in the same residence. All such people, as far as they're concerned, are considered part of a family. They consider it a family unit. So what are the different ways or units that we can look at for families? What you'll read about this week is about family structures that are nuclear, which is parents, children living in an immediate family, or families that are extended. Extended family includes aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, other mothers, all of those kind of family structures are considered extended families. You'll also read about families of orientation or families of origin, and here's how that's defined. The family into which you were born or adopted, and then a family of procreation, or what I call a family of choice, is the family that we create for ourselves. So it's those families we create and bring people together, like through marriages, through civil unions, through partnerships, those kinds of families that we choose by choice. Now, a family can be those people that you are biologically related to, or a family can be those people that you choose to bring into your circle and you say our family. So first of all, I know that this week's readings and this week's videos cover a long period of time. Remember, we're in an 8-week course, and so that's why so much has to be covered. But here are a couple of key takeaways I want you to remember as you're doing your readings and watching the videos this week, especially about the institution of family. First of all, remember that among African Americans, family was an enduring institution. It still remains that. So even as we're looking at the experience of enslaved Africans, of enslaved African American and Blacks here in this country, as we're looking at Jim Crowism, as we're looking at people moving through the civil rights movement, as we're looking at violence against African Americans in this country, the family still remains a source of support for those of us in the African American community. And so the institution of family, definitely one of the enduring institutions that we see growing even in times of tribulation. Now, a couple of things you may not pick up from the reading, so I'll tell you now. When it came to the care for children during the slave period, the elders in the community did a lot of the child rearing and child raising. Now, why is that? Well, enslaved African women and enslaved African American women had to be in the fields as well. They didn't have the luxury of staying home and being housewives or homemakers. They had to work in the fields along with the men. And it was only those people that were elderly that could no longer serve would be responsible for helping to raise the kids until they were able to go work out in the field. So, elders played a significant role during slavery in the raising of children. The other thing I want to let you know about is the role of the griot. So, the griot was the person who kept the history of the people. They kept record of who was born to whom, and that was really important because during slavery, there weren't these static roles played by men and women. There weren't these static roles of who was the parent of whom. And so it really became important for someone in the enslavement community, to keep track of whose children were whose, so there wasn't inbreeding among the children. So the griot was the one who kept the history of the people as well as the history of families. So that's important to remember in this section. It's also worth mentioning the part that John Hope Franklin talks about when he talks about how important marriage was for people that were leaving enslaved conditions. So the enslaved Black people were leaving slavery, and the first thing they were doing was going to get married. Now, why was that? Well, it legitimized them, their partnerships, and their children. And so marriage became a significant part of what enslaved Africans did or enslaved Black people did as they were leaving slavery. Now, this last thing I'll say is about Daniel Patrick Moynihan's report. You'll read about that this week too. Moynihan's report came out in 1965, and at the time it came out, the majority of Black families had two parents in the household. So there was both the father and the mother. But Moynihan's report focused on a handful of Black women who were without husbands and raising kids. And it was presented in a way as if this was commonplace within the Black community. So, as you're learning more about the Moynihan Report, just remember that that report was based on a minority of Black family structures. The other thing worth noting, though, is the stigmatization he put on Black families by saying that these Black women were raising, and I quote, unnaturally strong women and weak men. Again, Daniel Patrick Moynihan in his report said that Black women headed households raised unnaturally strong women and weak men. And this was part of the contributing factor, a lot of us as scholars believe, to the downfall of Black families and definitely the marginalization of Black women headed households. So, just a little information for you as you're reading more about the Moynihan Report. I'll add these three things that family provides in the African American community. Now, these are things that we can look across races and see that families, the institution of family provides. But especially in the African American community, I'd like to point to these three things that family provides. First, family provides socialization. It helps in the socialization, the communication of norms, the communication of culture. It comes within the family structure for the majority of African Americans. So, family provides socialization. Family also provides support, and not just support financially, right? It provides support culturally, educationally. It provides meaning to life, and it provides a sense of belonging, which goes to point number 3. The family provides a sense of identity for a lot of African Americans. And that's not just individual identity, but cultural identity. What it means to be a Black woman, what it means to be a Black male, what it means to be a Black person. Okay? All right, so those are 3 significant things that family provides. So I'll end this segment on African American families with the final point. In any sociological discussion about family and marriage, especially here in the US, there's always a conversation about who has the authority and power in the family. When it comes to African American families, up until the 1970s, 1980s, the majority of families were egalitarian. In other words, egalitarian family patterns began to emerge in slavery, in the slave system. Why? Mostly because it was necessary for survival. And it was important for being able to raise children because you didn't know if a parent would come home from the fields that day or not, right? So the community began to raise people, and there was a level of egalitarian rule that perpetuated as Blacks came out of slavery, perpetuated through the civil rights movement, perpetuated well into the 80s before we see significant levels of breakdown within the Black family, breakdowns in the number of marriages, for example. But overwhelmingly, egalitarian rule continues to be one of the primary sources of power within the Black family. Now, in cases where we see a patriarchy in place, that is where the male is the head of the household, right? He's the one that leads power, which is typical authority in a patriarchal system. We still see the second shift phenomenon happening among African American women the way it does for other women in the United States. So the second shift refers to coming home and having to be the primary one who takes care of housework, who takes care of childcare, where your first shift is out in the world, your second shift starts when you get home. So that is not any different for African American women in patriarchal systems. That ends the part of this lecture about African American families, and now let me talk a little bit about African Americans and the institution of religion. Let's begin with an understanding of the purpose of religion. So, what is the purpose for religion? Well, according to sociologists, it provides a meaning system. In other words, it helps us to understand culture, it helps us to understand norms, it helps us to understand chaos, it even helps us to explain unexplained phenomena. It provides a space of belonging. It gives people an opportunity to join groups and feel as if they have a sense of belonging because they all belong to the same group. So, religious groups and their members can become extended family members, especially within the African American community. So, as we look at religion, let's not forget that religion is about meaning making, it's about sense of belonging, creating senses of belonging. And within African American communities, even religious people that are part of the same religion can see themselves as an extended family. Now that we understand what religion provides, let's talk a little bit about what religion is a source for in the African American community. So, James Cone says that religion is one of the most important institutions within the Black community, within the African American community. Why is that? Well, it provides religious outlook and behaviors through teaching people socialization. So it's one of the ways, again, that we learn norms, we learn what's acceptable behavior, what is acceptable practice, what is the role for people within family units. A lot of that comes from religious beliefs and religious affiliation. So, Religion then becomes a source for socialization. It also becomes a source for social movements. So there are religious organizations that have been the center of social movements within the Black community. If we look back at the civil rights movements, you'll see some of that in this week and next week's videos. As we look at the civil rights movement, you have organizations like SNCC and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, where we see a lot of leadership from the civil rights movement coming out of churches. We see political organizations and political organizing happening in churches even today. And finally, many community leaders that we have in the African American or Black community came from churches. Just as a reminder, Martin Luther King Jr. is Reverend. He was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Often the Reverend is left off, but he came from a religious organization, religious foundation. So socialization, social movements, political organizing, and community leaders are all what what religious organizations have been the source for in the African American community. So now that we understand what religion is and what it provides, what it's a source for in the Black community, what are those forms of religion that are practiced within the Black community? So the first one is African spirituality. Those are indigenous forms of spirituality rooted in African culture, those traditions that came over with the enslaved Africans and that developed on the lands here by Black people born in the Americas. There's also Islamic faith, and not just traditional Muslims, not just the traditional Muslim faith like Sunni Muslims, but also the Black American Muslim faith, or Black Muslims, as they're also called. But the largest group of religious practice here in the Americas by Black people, African Americans, has historically been Christianity. Christianity then is African American Christianity, I should say, is a hybridization of African and American religions and tradition. Now, you have those African Americans that have adopted traditional Western or European forms of religious expression. But within the Black community, because Blacks were not allowed to practice religion with whites during segregation, you have Blacks who then take on their own traditions from Africa, their own traditions of worship, and develop them as part of what's called the Black church. So you have a Black church, and in that Black church, there's a hybridization of worship, a hybridization of practices, of traditions that create the Black experience in church. Also, you'll hear this week about Black liberation theology. Black liberation theology, James Cone is the one that talks about it. And the focus of Black liberation theology is about having religion be an expression of liberation in this life, not just waiting for the afterlife for religion, for freedom in general. So you'll also learn about Black liberation theology. Those are unique forms of expression within the African American community. Okay, so I've talked about the African American family, I've talked about African Americans and religion, and now what are those social interactions that happen between those two institutions? Here are three things I'd like you to remember as you complete your assignments this week. First, when we hear about the transmission of religion and people being introduced to religion, typically in the United States, the parents are the primary source. But when it comes to the African American community, grandparents as well as parents play a primary role in introducing younger generations to religion. So, initial religious contact, primary sources for that within the African American community are grandparents as well as parents, and in some cases, the grandparents more than the parents, okay? Religious faith are the sources of marriage beliefs and child rearing beliefs within the African American community. So, not for every African American, but historically, religious faiths have been part of the way in which those beliefs, those standards, get communicated down through the generation. Religion becomes one of those sociological institutions that impact belief and value. And finally, tensions can arise between family and religion. So just because they're both significant, historically significant in the African American community, it does not mean that religious institutions, and the individual family always agree and always get along. That's not the case. All right, so those are a couple of things to remember about the interactions between the institution of religion and family within the African American community. And just like that, we're all done in this video. So listen, thanks so much for hanging in there. I know it was over 20 minutes. You'll be all right. If you have any questions about anything that I've covered in today's video, please be sure you post that in our course discussion board under Ask Dr. X, or you can feel free to post the questions below. Even if you're not in my class and you just happen to watch this video, please feel free to post comments below. I will get back to you as soon as I am able. Hey, thanks so much for watching today's video. Now, if you enjoyed the video, why don't you do me a favor and give it a thumbs up? It'll tell the algorithm to push it out to other people that might need it. Also, feel free to leave me a comment below. I love engaging with people about higher education. Thanks so much for watching, and have a terrific week.